My name's Wayne Cristordo. This is part of an ongoing series that's devoted to insights and oversights and developing ideas which might help protect you from losing your mind. How many people are becoming mindless today because very simple ideas are ignored as certain narratives which sound as if the possessor of the narrative is really insightful, as if they really understand the way things are, when in fact they're simply a know-all who knows very little. So some of my heroes include Socrates. Well, there's a whole stack of them, but let's just say one of my heroes includes Socrates, insofar as he conceded how little he knows. Unfortunately, his student Plato seemed to know quite a lot. Now, notice what I've just done there. In entering into the discussion about insight and oversight, I deferred to an example of a person. In fact, two people, Socrates and Plato. I deferred to two characters, two people. Now, one thing that's very important to me, which I think is overlooked, a basic insight that we don't pay enough attention to, is all ideas that we have are personal. They involve people. And if you bear that in mind, the temptation to speak about the world in such a way as if it's not people involved, as if they're abstract entities or features pertaining to people, you can avoid this. Or to put it another way, you are not thinking. You might think you're thinking. Your mouth is moving. You're repeating words. You might be sounding really smart, but you're leaving something fundamental out. And the whole point of this little series of lectures I'm giving is to draw attention to the kinds of things you cannot leave out. If you leave them out, what you're thinking is just nonsense. And the motivation for this lecture series is the fact that I think we live in a world that's completely gone mad, and there's so much nonsense posing as depth. So shallowness purporting to be depth. So that's the introduction I'm giving to what I want to talk about today is character. I mentioned two characters already. One, Socrates. The second one, Plato. Socrates, I think, was a very humble man. Plato really loved Socrates. I don't think he kept much of that humility. Now, there's Plato scholars out there. I spent a lifetime reading about Plato, reading Plato, engaging with people about Plato, and a lot of people really love him, and me not so much. I like the fact that he loved Socrates. Okay, so coming back to what is it about Socrates I love? Well, Socrates knew that he didn't know very much. He was a bit of a smart-ass in that he went round tickling the nose of people who thought they knew a lot. Plato really loved ideas, and he devotes a whole theory to the nature and character of ideas. Note that I'm using the word character. I want to get back to the actual meaning of character per se. But as you can see the way I'm using the word when I say the character of ideas, I want to draw attention to the fact that when we speak of character, we're touching a nerve here, a raw nerve. And one good synonym for it would be spirit, but the essential quality of. So Plato loved ideas, but he knew, something in him knew, which was very smart, that he couldn't really access ideas until, first of all, he was inspired by a living person to consider ideas. That living person was Socrates, and as everybody knows, who knows anything about this story, Socrates was executed by the Athenians, and Plato thought that was a diabolical thing to do, it was a terrible thing to do, it was a blight upon the city, and he spent his life in many ways castigating the Athenians for that dreadful thing that they had done. Now, there's a whole lot of very interesting things to consider about the trial of Socrates, which I won't go into here. But I will just say this about Socrates' character. When taken to court, he proved to be a complete smartass, so much so that although he was nearly acquitted, not quite, he was condemned for the crimes he was purported to have committed. But when he had to discuss or propose what might be the fitting punishment for him, he so humiliated the Athenians that all these people that thought he was a bit of a smart-ass now wanted to kill him. So I think that's interesting. What character does. Okay. I said character is a quality, the character of something. We can talk about the character of a group, but we also, as I've used it just here, talk about the character of a person, someone's character. And everybody has a character. Whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether we can, as certain ancients and modern thinkers like Theophrastus or La Bruyere, Aristotle is also very big on the importance of character. We might be able to come up, as psychologists often do, with different types of character. Now that can be a useful thing, and I'm not denying that different qualities aren't dispersed, that we can identify a number of different characteristics that pertain to different human characters. At the same time, every one of us, in some way, carries something unique about themselves. Now, in saying this, I'm not romanticising the self. Unfortunately, human life is proven to be very expendable. It doesn't take much for people to dispense with other people's lives. So that's a very sad aspect of being human, but it's a true aspect. Nevertheless, each one that is being dispensed with or being valued, every person has some qualities which distinguish them from someone else, if we can but see it. Kids know this. You know, one of the things I love about kids is the way when they meet someone else in the class, they can get really enthusiastic about little Johnny or Mary because they can do something, or they're funny, or they just have some aspect of themselves which this other kid sees, and they want to celebrate it. They want to go and play with them. As we get older, this capacity tends to get jaded. But I just draw our attention to it because it's the kind of aspect of our character, of our nature. There I'm using character synonymous with nature. Part of a human character, the character of being human. So we can move from very individual to more general features. Sometimes in that movement from the individual to the more general, we engage in hyperbole or exaggerate our generalizations, exaggerate their importance, and then so therefore completely miss out on the insight that we need to make or would like to make as we move from a more particular to a more general insight about something. Thus it is when people start talking in very broad abstract terms about different races or different classes or different genders, it starts to get, pretty ropey kind of thinking. But at the same time, we are creatures that need to generalize. So it depends what we're doing when we're identifying the characteristics of something or the character of an individual or a group or the character even of an event. As we move into these different aspects of trying to grasp the specifications or as we try to generalize about the specifics of something. As we move into that, the danger is that we just get lost, that we oversee it by purporting that we understand something that we've really lost sight with. And I think this happens, again, I think people do this constantly as they start to use the imagined version of it. Sometimes it's a consensus group version about what people are like, whether they're black people or white people or Asian people. Stereotypes is a very good example of this, because in most stereotypes, There was something that someone did, or some people did, that might serve as a feature, or some feature that someone has, but it then starts to just go nuts. Okay, so that's one way in which we can see that character can easily get lost in generalization, even though the generalization may be an attempt to identify character, to generalize about character. Now, in our making around us, because all of us are always making things, whether I'm making this video, making this conversation, trying to make sense, or you're trying to make sense of where's he going with this, there's a participation, and this is the point I want to make. Character is intrinsic to our participation. We know that character is intrinsic to participation insofar as if someone were to show me a book of high-level physics and I don't know anything about physics, I'll just look at it. So the fact that I don't know this, that's part of my character, that I have not developed the skills necessary, or the training or the education necessary to make sense of something. Now, all information, all human communication, to be assessed, to be understood, requires something on the part of the person receiving or surveying that information, listening to that communication, to be able to process it. So you bring yourself to whatever is coming to you. And that's why, for example, it doesn't matter how deep or insightful something is that comes your way. If you're not ready for it, if you're not listening to it, if you're not able to process it, it's meaningless to you. Sometimes you might go, that's something I should think about later. This happens all the time. The people are hearing stuff, but they're not hearing it. They're not in the position, for whatever reason, they're not there with it. But this really comes back to character, the kind of person you are, the kind of qualities that you bring to bear. Now, ancient writers, as I indicated before, spent a lot of time thinking about character. Aristotle, for example, writes in the Ethics to help prepare people's character to participate in political life. So he writes a book called The Ethics and then a book called The Politics. He also then discusses tragedy in the Poetics, because he's interested in what the art form discloses about character and characters. Now, all literature and all drama, every time we're watching a TV cop show, or a soapy, or one of the, the more sophisticated versions of these series, we're drawn into the characters. And we're drawn into the characters because we're mimetic creatures. We learn from the behaviour of other people. The character of a child is going to be very much affected by, I won't say completely formed, but affected by, because we're also reactive creatures. We can say no, we can push back, and we do this constantly. This is as much a part of our being as simply absorbing and accepting. It's that resistance. We'll be somewhat informed by the members of the group, our family, our educators, obviously all those who we engage with. Their character matters. It affects our character. It doesn't determine, that's too strong a word, but it plays a role in activating us as we process our character, our character develops. It's not completely conscious. A lot of it is subconscious. Some of it is conscious. Now, although we can engage in certain studies to try and improve our behaviour, improve our character, there's some limitations in what can be done with that. So I'm not speaking now as a psychologist or as a therapist. I'm not wanting to say that psychology or therapy can't do important things. So don't get me wrong. But I am saying that a lot of aspects of ourselves are a mystery to us, all of us. We don't really know what we're capable of. We don't really know the full extent of our character until it's been tried. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way things are. Likewise, we can't really teach character. What you can do, that is, I cannot teach you how to be, how to have your character. A therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist has to work with what's there and then tries to help it be better, improve what's there. But ultimately, there's all this stuff that no one has access to except you. And even a lot of that is a mystery to yourself. So the point I'm getting at here is this is what, as I said, you bring this to a situation. It's all important. It's extremely important, but it's a mystery. It's something you just got to deal with. And the point I'm wanting to make now in terms of insights, oversights, the way we develop knowledge, is that this is an unavoidable component that all of us, is an unimportant, let me rephrase that. It's an intrinsic aspect of all of us. We can, as I said, be attenuated more to this character, that character. If we're smart, if we're astute enough, we can see the kinds of characters around us, what they're doing. If for example, people who go to university, they've come from high school, most of them are quite young, and they're exposed to a professor who's really exciting, who appeals to them. And if they love their subject, if they have a bit of panache and a bit of style, they can have a big impact upon that student's character. And they may encourage that student to think just like them. And this can be, if they are of good character, if they are insightful people, this can be something that's really helping a young person along. Which is frequently the case, if they are not particularly good character, they're not a particularly thoughtful person, they might be stylistically good at presenting stuff, they might be enthusiastic about what they know, and they might have certain personality qualities, charming qualities that are even inspirational. But if, for example, there's a big character flaw, like, the one I will keep referring over and over again into this lecture, just this lecture, but this lecture series, is because I think it is so prevalent and does so much damage. The character flaw of being a know-all, of not being really genuinely humble in themselves, of thinking they know much more than they do, then all those other characteristics of their character are contributing to the tragedy that they are making, that they are helping enable. And that tragedy may be what they do to your life, what they do with others, to the community around them. And I do think that we are living in a very tragic moment historically. I will qualify this and say human beings are constantly drawn into tragic situations. As I said in an earlier lecture, we're always going in, coming out, or being in hell. That's inevitable. So the tragic is the denouement of this flaw. This is a very Aristotelian way of understanding tragedy, but I think it's very insightful, that some flaw ultimately is brought out into the open. And it's brought out into the open because it's there, things are triggering it, and the person, in a sense, who's captured by their own flaw is not attentive enough, attuned enough, astute enough, capable enough. Some of it may be conscious, some of it may just be out of their control to do anything about it, but it does damage. If you want to understand ideas, if you want an education, one thing you should be looking at is what kind of people are these ideas forming? Ideas are like magnets of character formation. They're not in, again, artists, really great artists knew this. Dostoevsky is mastermind at understanding this. Thus in works like The Devils or The Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, he has various characters who are, in a sense, possessed. That's also one of his, The Possessed or The Devils is the title of one of his books, but who are possessed by their ideas. But you can see that what this possession does. They are possessed by, as well as they start possessing others as they communicate these ideas. It's a very infectious but insidious kind of infectiousness. Now, in saying this, don't misunderstand me. Don't think that I am saying that if you identify someone like this, that they are human garbage or that they are should be put down or anything like this. And I use that word very deliberately, human garbage, because I've noticed when I'm looking at YouTube comments, the vitriol that people use when they think that someone doesn't share their political objectives, especially if their political objectives are ones which are going to make a much more just world. If they think it's going to make a much more just world. And someone who they see as an impediment to it is they just a racist, just a sexist, just a piece of human garbage. I think that's a shocking way to think. And I think the person who says that is really lost. I don't consider them a piece of human garbage. They might consider me a piece of human garbage because I don't go along with their way of seeing things. But I don't consider, I think they're lost. I think they've lost their soul. I think they've lost their mind. I think their character has been severely flawed because of the ideas that they've adopted, and they do not even see what they are saying. So when the person who is screeching and screaming at someone calling them a hater is presenting themselves as if they're not a hater, anyone can see that they've lost their minds. They don't know what they're doing. They are really lost. That's sad. Some will see it later. And life is very punishing. First of all, the tragic events that build up, that accrue, that we are entering, as I said, I think, into a very tragic period. This is the result of all these character flaws. It's only systemic insofar as it's widespread, it's patterned, but it's more than that. That even that term is very limited. Ultimately, it depends upon the fostering of certain characteristics, the development, the cultivation of certain types. In a sense, the breeding of monsters, the cultivation of monsters by a whole set of practices being copied by each other. Remember I said about mimesis. a whole set of participations in which we're picking up, doing things, and we're not noticing the damage that we do because we're insufficiently attuned to the full array or the full development, the full spread of consequences of our action. Now, we're all in that position. We all only see a little bit of what we do. Shards of us left all over the place. But if what we're doing is in some way quite toxic, someone poisoned, that there's something, and I use this word very deliberately, evil in this. And evil, and by the term evil, I'm not even talking about a moral quality. Because this stuff that I'm hoping to draw you into over a series of lectures, and it will take time for you to get it. It's not just one thing. It's not self-contained, even though I'll present it in small bites. But for me to convey to you a certain kind of sensibility where you can appreciate what it is that I'm seeing. And I think if anyone has anything that's worth saying, they have to see something. And all the things, I mentioned Shakespeare before, I mentioned Dostoevsky. There's a whole lot of people I've learnt from because they've seen something. They haven't argued something. I'm not arguing anything. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in conveying to you something that I see. When I see a person screeching at other people, calling them a hater, and they're doing it full of hate, I see that. It's me trying to say to them, you're contradicting yourself. Well, what's the point of that? Because they're not even going to listen. Because their character is so involved in what they're doing, they can't stand back. Their character has already, in a sense, been misshapen. And the tragedy of the human condition is such that what tends to happen over and over again, both at a personal and collective level, is when certain characteristics, a certain character develops that's really destructive, it tends to have to go through almost to the end. I'm not saying there's no redemption that's possible, but usually the redemption, any redemption that there is, comes after a lot of suffering. A lot of suffering to other people and a lot of suffering to that person themselves. In a sense, they have to realise it themselves. And although I'm giving a series of talks, speech can only do so much. Most of the time, most people listen to the kind of speech that their character is ready to listen to, that they can identify with in some way. This is a much truer use of the term identity than the appallingly stupid way, in my opinion, this word is being bandied about just to create a kind of group and groupthink about other groups in order to enhance your position within the group. And we'll get on to that. I really, such a brainless age, and the worst are, in my opinion, the worst are the people that think they're the most intelligent, the know-all, and it's a character flaw. This is, I'll keep coming back to, it's a character flaw, that we live in an age where we think, or our elite, many members of our elite, think that they are better people. This is why they want to take down statues. This is why they want to control the history books, that we're so much better, and they do not see the evil that is being perpetrated by they themselves, by we ourselves in this world. And the consequences of this are so potentially devastating. It's quite shocking that people don't see it. And I'm sure that there's going to be some people, rolling their eyes, guffawing, sneering, laughing at this old guy in a jumper who looks just like a lunatic because they don't get it. Well, I'm sorry. There's going to be other people, if anyone ever watches this, there'll be two types of people watching this. Those that do that and those that get it. Those that agree. those that see it, those that see the damage that's done to their family, to their loved ones, to their friends, in seeing how at some point their character, someone went from being a pretty nice kid, this is very often, I've seen this a lot with students, went from being sensitive, thoughtful, humble, wanting to understand more, someone with an open heart, has become a complete know-all, tyrant, intolerant in the name of tolerance kind of person. Now, as I said, psychologists and therapists may help people that feel stuck. But this kind of disease of character, a whole lot of psychologists wouldn't even see it as a problem. You know, they just don't see the problem. Because someone's able to function. They're functioning really well. They can be really high functioning. They can be working in big tech companies. They can be a psychotherapist like the woman I read about the other day. I can't remember what nationality is. She was talking at Yale, saying how, you know, she so hates white people, she wants to kill people. She wants to shoot them. If you can't see that's a character flaw, then you can't see. If you think that's perfectly reasonable, and that, you know, here's a psychotherapist, it's just so crazy, isn't it? Here's a psychotherapist who has found a way for all her own neuroses, to use psychotherapeutical kind of language, psychological language, found a way to sum up what it is that's made her world so bad. It just doesn't cut it. And that's something else. If there's a certain characteristic, I think it's worth keeping, or quality. It's sort of been pretty sceptical. And just the fact that all sorts of people are agreeing to something and reading off the hymn book, don't go along with it, unless if you want to keep your brain. You can either decide, I'm going to keep my brain, or no, I'm going to be like one of those zombies. You know, those zombie movies that it seems like in the 1990s and 2000 there was a never-ending slew of zombie movies, which I think in some way are really an expression of the lack of the loss of character that is intrinsic to the kind of world we're making. And somewhere deeply in the subconscious, not understood in a Jungian or Freudian way, yes, we know it, we can see it, and we express it this way, and it's coming out this way. Now, one last thing I want to discuss about character and the loss of character, which ties into the general mosaic, I suppose, I'm trying to put together, in which we consider ideas, we consider the impact that they have, especially the bad ideas, and ways of trying to fortify ourselves against taking upon these ideas on board, so that we don't lose our soul. To repeat, character, if I didn't say it outright, I want to say it. Your soul is your character. It changes. I don't see it as immortal in the way that it's something static and sort of hovering above us. It's this quality it's not really the mind, it's not really the body, but the mind and the body contribute and are in some ways expressions of it. But it's something else altogether. It's just something else that I think is very much what thwarts those people whose ambition it is to form the world in a way that is complete conformity to their ideas about it. Now, these people really scare me. And these are ideologues. And it's a very long story, and in some ways I've discussed this in some of my writings, but what distinguishes the modern mind and modern project is a commitment to a whole slew of ideas so a certain kind of epistemology. You use a certain theory of knowledge in order to assess what's in the world, all that stuff that's out there, the dreamy stuff. We have such stuff as dreams are made on, says Prospero. So the stuff of our dreams, it gets processed through a certain ways of knowing things, so that you say this bit and this bit are the real bits, and the other bit is a kind of fantasy that we can dispense with. It's selecting certain characteristics in order for us to develop our potential. This was the great dream of the Enlightenment. So we would not be overwhelmed by the fantasies, the fantastic nature of the imagination. We would make sure that the human understanding was able to surveil the images and associations that we have in order to help cultivate us so that we could be in a better world, as well as understand the mechanisms of nature that would make our life easier within the world. That's a quick summing up of what was going on. And very quickly that moved from that kind of what I call idealism to ideology. And we now live in an age in which ideology is just everywhere. So if, for example, someone doesn't like progress, they're considered a conservative. So they're labelled by an ideological term that really comes out of the 18th, 19th century. This, I think, is, again, a very, very sad and brainless way to do things, because it suggests that ideas are such they can be put in certain chains, and if you, depending who you are, you'll fit in that chain of ideas or this chain of ideas. Well, if you're really happy to think that your character can just fit within the chain of ideas, well, I'm sorry for you. What can I say? But why would you do that? Why would you give yourself over in that way? And yet, it does seem to me that a whole lot of people who ambition, social ambition, economic ambition, want to simultaneously fix up the world, which means make the world, which is one mystery after another. They want to stop the world so it fits our ideas of the world. You might remember Goethe's Faust. Faust sells his soul to the devil, and the pact is, at the moment that Faust says, stop, this is what I want, forever, he loses his soul. That's Goethe's Faust. It's such a great idea, because I think that's absolutely right. Because on the one hand, I'll use theological terms. God's world is an infinite mystery which we are always playing catch up with. The world of the self, which is lost, so the lost self, is a world that thinks that what it knows suffices to rule the world, to be the world, to eternalize. It should be eternalized. This, I think, is the tragedy of the dominance of ideas, and it's the ideas of progress have all the running because they seem to be so good. All the smart people, all the people at all the universities, and now it's infiltrated all our institutions. The smartest kids who've gone to college think these thoughts, whereas in the bars and the restaurants and the places where, and in the more rural areas, people think this is nonsense. So they're fortified against these ideas, but others who get exposed to it love these ideas, think that this is the stuff. So they're being seduced, as I said, by the characters of their teachers, by the character of the ideas, because no one's really said to them, okay, here's an idea, dream up 5 or 6 things that you might argue against that. And then come back and argue against that. And let's just see where the chips fail. No. To do that would mean a certain kind of openness that would shut down the project, because the project requires a certain commitment from the outset, that Faustian pact, to what the justice is, what the world would look like if it were stopped, and ultimately conformity to the kind of abstractions which make it seem as if you know what the answer to justice is and what the world is. These abstractions, the good, the true, the beautiful, the just, and you know what it is, and such big words as equality, emancipation, anti-domination, these words you start to, they really seem really very strong, powerful words, and you must protect. Well, in order for these narratives to be maintained, you need a group of people who will oversee anyone who doesn't go along with the narrative, and you, having gone to the place of higher education, you who are so privileged are able to pretend that you're not privileged because you're critical of privilege. You can see this is just crazy. And it's a kind of intellectual derangement that it sounds very deep, but it's so shallow, because if you look into your own heart, that what you're really going to do with this knowledge that you've acquired is you're presenting yourself in the marketplace of ideas as being someone that should enforce these ideas and be paid to do so, and make sure you get bread on the table to monitor the narratives of others, to call other people out who don't live up to the ideas and ideals that you somehow learnt and realised that at the age of 18, 19, 20, this is the way the world is. And if you think, wow, this is only possible if you've lost your mind and you want other people to lose their mind. And this is the world that we are building, is a world in which compliance ultimately will leave people without character. That the only character that's left, there's a very famous book by a Russian writer called Zamyatin called We. It's a great title which sums up the predicament, the ideological predicament that he saw early on with the Soviet Union, of the complete dissolution of the self into this larger collective, which is part of a program, an elite group that dictate the character of the program and require, quite simply, that everyone loses their character into this other we. I think if you can take one thing away from this lecture today, it's your character really matters. Don't give it up. When you're listening to ideas, look at what kind of characters have these ideas. Look at what kind of characteristics these ideas cultivate. See whether they really make you genuinely a more open-hearted, thoughtful kind of person. Don't lose your brain. Don't lose your soul. Keep your own character. The world, it's your engagement with the world which will ultimately reveal to you what that character is. Of course, there's no guarantee that your character will be good. That's a whole other ball game. But if you don't have any character, I can tell you this, if you've lost it, that is, nothing you do will be good.